listening to Big World Network.
Skyfire, Season 2, Episode 3. Written and read by Arthur W. Johnson. Elsewhere. Yet in the wild and untamed places there were such men who knew no bounds, who would forsake the gentle graces for forested hill and rougher grounds. The north woods were filled with the torturous screams of the man fighting the very precipice of death. Stands near the spirits poured more cold water on the hot stones in the squat sweat lodge and chanted incantations to the great ones above about the glories of this man with white skin. He poured cold water on the parallel wounds of his unusual patient, bringing on more of the delirium-driven shrieks. Stands near the spirit stopped chanting to prepare a salve from the fat of the bear that had caused the wounds, adding herbs he had personally selected. He spoke the new name for the white man, a name he had chosen for him, for as speaker to the spirits he had the right to choose and give names. Grandfather who dwells in the forest of the bear, grandfather of the bear, hear me speak to you about this man I call Bear Claw. Hear me speak of his honor and his valor. Hear the tale of how this man of powerful strength fought with the bear. And grandfather, hear how he killed the bear with only a knife. He stopped chanting while he rubbed the concoction into the wounds on the man's chest and arms. With a grunt, he rolled the big man onto his side and, reaching over him, began rubbing the smelly ointment into the gashes on his back. With a howl, a hairy arm flew out, catching Stands near the spirits across the side of his graying head and sending him toppling against the hot rocks. A shower of sparks crackled from the pieces of dried twigs falling from the low roof where his blackened deer-hide-clad feet had scraped them loose as he tumbled. Grandfather, he has much strength even near death, he chanted comically as he righted himself. The shaman crawled back to the prone figure and watched him cautiously for a moment. He would never know what the man had looked like before the bear disfigured him with the slashing claws and gnashing teeth. The end of his nose was a bloody pulp. A set of vertical claw marks, deep and oozing, centered over his left eye, continuing on to the end of his hairy chin. Stands near the spirits, wondered why the white man did not pluck his face hairs the way the shaman's people did. But it was only a passing thought as he rubbed ointment into the wounds and chanted. The tribe dwelt so far from the usual path that the white trappers traveled that few were ever seen by his people, and then only from a distance. Therefore, when the old shaman found Bear Claw lying across the carcass of a dead bear with the first snow beginning to blanket them, the stranger was quite a novelty. Curiosity was so high that Stands near the spirits had a difficult time convincing the members of the tribe to leave him alone so he could administer his medicine. He had given the task of repairing the remains of the bear to his brother's woman. Several days had passed since the white man and the bear had been brought back to the encampment. Waving Grass had skinned the bear and stretched the hide in her lodge to dry, then carved the meat and distributed it to the tribe, saving a portion to give to Bear Claw if he survived. A woman's voice in an unfamiliar babble came through the haze to the semi-conscious man, a soft voice that appealed pleasantly to his sore mind. Then a coarser voice spoke in the same tongue. He tried to move, but pain seared through his body. He stifled a howl and opened his right eye, realizing that the left would not follow. He wondered what was happening to him. Was he the victim of these people's tortures? He had heard strange tales about the people of the North Country when he was a boy back in Kentucky. Then he remembered the bear and vividly recalled the struggle. His old brown Bess had misfired and the bear had kept coming. He had disturbed it as it was about to enter its den to hibernate. He knew better than to tangle with the bear close in, but as he turned to run, he tripped over something hidden in the fallen snow. The bear was all over him before he could get up. He had been committed to battle. The strong musk of the bear had rankled his nostrils as his head and shoulders were crushed into the bear's chest by powerful forelegs. Hot searing pain had shot across his back from the long bony claws. He had remembered the knife in his belt and had managed to force an arm downward to grasp the hickory handle. He had turned the point to the bear's midsection as the powerful paws again crushed him. With a howl, the bear released him, allowing him room to slash the knife upwards. In retaliation, the bear had slashed downward across his face and chest. The mauling stroke had sent the knife flying into the snow, leaving him disarmed and in fear for his life. The blood running into his eyes had prevented him from seeing well enough to run. Bear had lunged at him, entrails flying from its open belly, knocking him to the ground. His knuckles crashed against something hard. He rolled his hand over, grasping the chunk of rock, and had begun bashing at the bear's skull just as the heavy creature's jaws closed across its nose. He had continued to hammer on the thick bony skull as the two rolled down the hillside, locked in mortal combat until all went black. Thinking about it now, he realized that, contrary to his childhood tales, the people had probably saved his life. He again tried to sit up, wincing from the effort, and settled for dropping his right arm under himself. "You there!" he called to the figure squatting in the doorway. The figure looked around and spoke in that strange tongue to the woman beyond the door. He heard muffled footsteps rush away as the man crawled across the dirt floor of the low sweat lodge to where he lay. The words were still unfamiliar as the shaman spoke to him. As best he could for his condition, he tried to say in sign language that he didn't understand. To his surprise, the man answered in kind, although the signals were a bit different. He was thankful to his Chickasaw acquaintance back in Missouri country for teaching the basics of it to him. The acquaintance had not been a friend, for he had no friends. He pretended well enough until he got what he wanted, then moved on. He trusted no one, and that distrust usually engendered the same in return. "I am stands near the spirits," his host signed. After several attempts because of the variations, he repeated the name back to the shaman, then spoke it in English. The Indian looked at him curiously as he signed once again and spoke at the same time, "Stands near the spirits." The man of medicine repeated the name in English several times, smiling at the rhythm. He began to sign his own name then, but was stumped, for there were no signs for the Anglo name Alfred Simpson. "Stands near the spirits," interrupted and signed, "You are Bearclaw." Once again it took several attempts before he understood. Bearclaw smiled, and the smile broke into a laugh. He understood the significance of being named, and more importantly, named into the tribe. He was being accepted by these people and honored in their fashion. Because of the old tales, he had feared he would be killed as he entered the land of the geysers and the yellow soil, for the Blackfoot were said to hate the white men. However, it seemed they had great esteem for one who could kill a bear with only a knife and a rock, and survive, pitiful though he must look. He spoke and signed his name. Stands near the spirits spoke the English words Bearclaw several times the way he had done with his own name. Both men laughed, Bearclaw for the simple pleasure of being alive, and the man of medicine for seeing joy on his patient's face. The moment passed as the new figure blocked the light of the entrance and spoke to Stands near the spirit. He was invited to enter along with the woman who accompanied him. They sat near Bearclaw as introductions were made in their language and in sign language. It was a slow and tedious process as Bearclaw figured out the nuances of their version of signing. Bearclaw's name was spoken in English to accompany the signs. As the other man's name was signed, Bearclaw translated it to English for their benefit. "Deerstalker," the newcomer repeated several times, then nodded his graying head in approval. Stands near the spirits went on to explain that not only was Deerstalker his brother, but also the head of the tribe. He went on to say that the woman was the one who had skinned the bear, dried the hide, and prepared the meat, and that she was Deerstalker's woman, Waving Grass. Bearclaw looked at her for a long moment, absorbing the soft doe eyes and gentle curve of her cheek before he spoke her name like a prayer. Deerstalker shifted uneasily, and Bearclaw caught the movement. He feigned soreness from his wounds to cover the way he had spoken her name, and lay back with his eyes closed. He listened to their conversation, not understanding a word, then raised himself back up with a wince and a groan. Stands near the spirit again signed that Waving Grass was Deerstalker's woman for his clarification. Bearclaw signed that he understood, and they all smiled at his acceptance, but he couldn't help muttering in English that he wished it weren't so. Waving Grass drew her hand from behind her back with the symbol of honor she had made for Bearclaw. She lowered it over his head as Stands near the spirits explained that they were the claws of the bear that he had killed and the symbol of its power, which now became his power. As the cold, bony claws touched the naked skin of his neck and shoulders, a chill swept over him. He wondered what supernatural powers these people possessed that could pass the power of the animal to him. But he couldn't deny that they had done so, for he could feel himself strengthening already. He leaned on his elbow and looked at each face, seeing their confidence in the passing of the bear's power. Deerstalker rocked forward on his knees, his head just clearing the sweat lodged roof, and spoke to stands near the spirits. He then gave Bearclaw a look of guarded acceptance and made the signs that wished him a quick recovery. He then crawled to the door, motioning Waving Grass to follow. She stayed for but a moment, staring at Bearclaw's brawny, wounded chest with streaks of hair missing, then peered into his hazel eyes with a look of sincere sympathy. He mistook the sympathy for desire. He watched her leave with a longing that he hadn't felt for some time. As time passed in the quiet forest, Bearclaw's muscles healed and the scabs began to slough away. He spent a good deal of time learning the Blackfoot language and teaching his own form of English in return. He had learned his English in the usual way at home with pass the salt and do your chores. The backwoods of Kentucky didn't require a great deal of education other than what was needed for survival, but he felt qualified to trade what he knew for what the Blackfoot knew just the same. His dreams of the fight with the bear had begun to bother him less, and he was back to sleeping through the night, waking early and refreshed. One such morning he crawled out into the dawning light and sniffed the moist air. He felt an urgency to explore his surroundings. Following his nose, he came upon a shallow valley where the rising sun glistened golden through the misty vapor that filled the spaces between the ground and the tops of the low-lying bushes. A thrush perched on the topmost limb of a scrub oak just above the fog and sang to another male on a similar bush across the meadow to proclaim his territory. An unusual sense of tranquility possessed Bearclaw as he slowly parted the waist-high fog and made his way down the slope. The damp grasses licked his ankles until his steps sank into water. He stopped and listened. A quiet, repetitive smacking sound came to him. He backed up a couple paces and sat down in the mist and moist grass to wait for the sun to dissipate the fog and turn the half-light into full-fledged day. As the haze burned away, he discovered he was at the edge of a marsh where a pair of teal ducks paddled and groped in the water for their breakfast. They were undisturbed by his silent presence as they upended so that their tails pointed skyward, then dropped level, their bills smacking and clapping the marsh grasses back into their gullets. He was thankful for the warming trend during his recovery. The snows had melted and a pair of southbound ducks had been lured to pause in their journey. He felt at peace with himself for the first time in many years. Maybe near-death experiences did that to a man. He felt at peace with nature as well and wished it could go on forever. He was not accustomed to the feeling and almost liked it. Then Waving Grass's soft voice broke the silence from close behind him. He snapped his head around and looked into her doe-brown eyes. He understood enough of the words to get by, and as she sat down beside him, replied, "I'm enjoying nature in the quiet of the morning." She looked at him curiously and sympathetically touched the scars on his cheek. His eyes still had vision, but through lids that had knitted sideways when they healed. She followed the path of the scars down his chin and onto his chest. Her touch aroused a sensation that he could not ignore. His shirt was open, and she traced each scar with the tip of her finger. He could no longer control the urge he felt the first time he had seen Waving Grass when he was crawling back from the brink of death. He lay back in the damp grass, pulling her down with him. She struggled at first and then relaxed and let the moment take control of her. She laid her head on his shoulder and caressed his chest guardedly with her open hand. He stroked her hair and then her shoulder. Her face came up to his and their lips parted together as sweet oblivion carried them away. Afterward, the grasses warmed and dried beneath them as they lay silently in each other's arms, their breathing calmed. The ducks had long since left for quieter ponds, but Bearclaw and Waving Grass had not been aware of their departure. Then a shadow came over them as Deerstalker looked down at their naked bodies. Waving Grass shied away as Bearclaw leapt to his feet. "I warned them not to trust you," Deerstalker said in his own tongue as he set his jaw for the attack. They grappled in the morning grass and splashed out into the marsh. An obsidian knife glinted wet as it flashed through the air, plunging downward. But the strength of the bear grabbed the wrist and held it fast. They fell backward into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. The water boiled as the two twisted and writhed like prehistoric beasts in combat. The birds ceased their song to listen to the deadly duel. The surface stilled and erupted in a spray as they rose in unison before plunging below the surface of secrets again. A redness spread outward on the rippling surface before a lone head again broke it. The figure rose in the waist-deep water and strode, dripping from the marsh, to the naked woman cowering in the grass. He stretched out beside her, and she laid her head against his scarred chest. She knew her husband of many years would not be rising from the pool, and her life would forevermore be linked to Bear Claw. The walk back to the lodge of Stands Near the Spirits had been a solemn one, with neither touching nor looking at the other. Both were wrapped in their private thoughts. They sat silently before the fire pit as the man of medicine raised his head for the first time since they had entered the lodge. They had not spoken, nor would they until he spoke first. He opened his eyes and stared trance-like between them for a moment, then slowly shifted his gaze to Waving Grass and then to Bear Claw before again searching the void between them. A single tear worked its way down his cheek. "The grandfathers have shown me," he said. "I have seen Deerstalker among them." Waving Grass shifted uneasily in preparation to speak, but Stands Near the Spirit raised his hand to halt her words. "I should kill both of you for my brother's death, but the grandfathers told me long ago that my brother's woman would be untrue in the presence of a man of white skin. They told me that my brother would die at the bottom of a reed-filled marsh. These things cannot change, for the man above has willed them. Because I have foreseen this, I am not as angered as I would like to be, for he was my brother. But I am truly saddened, for I had hoped I was wrong." My brother was not angered, for he knew of my vision. He asked if you were the one who would kill him, and I could not answer him. I knew, but I could not say, for it would change what man above desired, so I bowed my head. He looked at Waving Grass in dismay. "You have two choices, woman of my brother," he said. "You may leave the village with this man before the truth is known, never to return, or you may remain and take your punishment. Because you were my brother's woman, I will allow you 3 days if you go now as you are." He paused before slowly adding, "with nothing." He looked into her eyes and saw the pain. "You knew this would happen if you were untrue. You were raised in the tribal laws, and you know how strict the laws are concerning a woman lying with a man who is not her husband. I cannot change the laws, and by them you must be tortured until you die. I think you should go." "Then it will be," she said softly, bowing her head obediently. "Can't we just act like nothing happened?" Bear Claw blurted out. "I'll leave and she can stay here with her people." "No!" Stands Near the Spirits leaned forward and stared into Bear Claw's eyes, the good and the bad one. "Our sense of dignity is a strong thing. She knows that she has done wrong and must be punished. I offer her life because these things were willed by a stronger powers than mine." He looked hard at Bear Claw before whispering, "She must go or die." Waving Grass spoke quietly. "I will go, but before I do, can you tell me what you have seen for me? Do you wish to know more sadness, woman?" She shuddered and looked at Bear Claw before saying, "No, I will wait for the passing of time to tell me."
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.